I think most of our listeners are probably aware that there's been some severe problems with the overall national economy, and that's filtered down kind of for the first time to the local economy as well. And I think people are also aware that over 50% of GLT's funding comes from local businesses and from listeners. So those two areas, which have been on an upward trend for years, have reacted, I guess, or followed trends for the national economy. And listener support is down. Business support is softer than it's been in a long time. The listener support, in particular, was affected by a factor that we had no control over. We got hit by lightning back in our antenna was damaged by lightning back in the fall. We were operating at lower power. So we literally had fewer listeners to even ask for money, and our fall fund drive was $10,000 lower than what it needed to be. So between that and the softening in the economy that sort of filters through to the business support, those two sectors are much softer cash flow than what we've had over the last decade. And then, of course, I think people are also aware that the Illinois state economy is in rough shape. The annual state grant that we get was cut by 40%, and then, we're not sure when we're actually going to see that money. That's a fairly small proportion of our budget, but in combination with the other two factors, we kind of have a perfect storm of negative cash flow or diminished cash flow. One thing that I think is important to note is that Illinois State University, which is a significant supporter of the station and account for about a third of our budget, has held the line. I mean, have continued to support the station. There are no cuts coming from that segment of our budget. But in the other areas, everything is down in terms of revenue.
So what has to happen for us to get out of this mess and save programs and GLT hosts?
Well, frankly, I'm not sure that the Illinois State grant will ever come back. As far as listener support and business support, we're working hard to, get the business support back up to where it was before. I'm encouraged with the way that's going, but we still have this sort of short-term cash flow issues. In terms of listener support, we're just trying to replace the funds that we lost in the fall and to kind of build back up, because we need to be on the costs of everything keep going up, so we need to keep raising more money from those sectors in order to preserve programming and people. And people, the people that listeners hear on the air, whether it's local hosts or national public radio personalities, they cost money too. That's part of the service that people are paying for when they make a pledge or a contribution to the station.
Talking about a record fund drive goal, the station's never tried to raise this much in one fund drive, $125,000. You're a pretty optimistic person. We've got a lot of financial pressure. Do you think that's doable?
Yeah, we try to be extremely realistic every time we set goals. It's 25% increase, but on the other hand, it's $25,000. So with a couple of hundred listeners doing a little bit more, that's possible. What would really be great is if a couple of thousand listeners who have been listeners but never contributors would step forward for the first time. We might even exceed the goal if that was to occur. So we're cautiously optimistic. And that $25,000 will not, frankly, solve the problem. But that, in conjunction with other efforts that we're undertaking, we hope will keep from having to go to the point where we look at our expenses and say, okay, this has got to go. And this could be your favorite announcer.
And before we get to programs and people and what programs and people might go, there's also another alternative, which is a third fund drive, which is an unusual situation for GLT. If we don't reach the goal or fall significantly short in this particular fund drive in April, there could be another fund drive.
Right. We have traditionally tried to keep it to 2 fund drives a year. There are other public radio stations that do 3, sometimes even 4 fund drives during the course of a single fiscal year. But our situation is serious enough that if we don't make progress during the spring fund drive, we may have to do another one before the end of the fiscal year, which would mean in early summer.
So the hope is we just get all the business done in April.
Absolutely.
And if we don't, and we have to do a third fund drive, and that falls short, I'm sure on the minds of listeners and financial contributors is, oh my God, what programs and GLT hosts are you talking about?
Well, I'm just as much in denial as anybody else about that. The trouble is, because we've talked about cutting program services from national sources, short of cutting Morning Edition or All Things Considered, which are the biggest single chunks of that, there really isn't much cost saving to be obtained by cutting those programs. So we'd have to cut a lot of them. We'd have to be This American Life and Car Talk and Fresh Air. Or it would have to be a person or two from our local staff.
So the spring fund drive campaign is really already underway. Financial contributors are getting letters in the mail. We're on the air already explaining the situation. What should a listener do to help when they hear those messages, get the letter, hear it on the air? What do you want them to do?
Give a little bit more than before. Maybe if you're already a contributor, which we appreciate, talk to your friends who you think might be GLT listeners, or if you know they're GLT listeners and they have never given money to the station, now's the time to do it.
Okay, Bruce, thanks.